Hi everyone. I was looking over your comprehension answers to the comprehension questions, and I just think that we need to have maybe just a quick wrap up summary of the story. I feel like there's still some things that a few of you don't quite get, and so I thought maybe I would just go through the story with you real quick. So our story starts out with three main characters. There are some extra characters, but we focus mostly on Tariq, who is the sheik and also the father in this story. He is the sheik, which means he is like the head of the clan of people. And then Hamed, who isn't alive through most of the story, but is still a very important character. He is the oldest brother and Tariq's oldest son, and also, as the story says, Tariq's favorite son, which as a parent is disturbing for me. And then there is our main character, who is Nadia. And Nadia is Tariq's daughter. It is also said that Nadia is very willful. Now, what does willful mean? Willful means rather stubborn, and she does what she wants to do, no matter what. And so the sheik says that he is frustrated with his willful daughter. But as we'll see later on in the story, the sheik is kind of willful himself. So maybe he sees a little piece of himself in his daughter. So the story starts out, they are Bedouins, which means they are, they move around. They are not farmers, but shepherds, which means they have flocks of sheep. And when the sheep eat up all of the grass in the area they're camped in their tents, they pick up their tents and move to a new place where there is better grass for their sheep to eat. So Hamed, who is the oldest son, sets off to find more pasture land, better pasture land for the sheep. And he never returns. Now, Nadia and Hamed had this really fabulous relationship because she would get so angry and upset, and no one was able to calm her down except her older brother, Hamed. He would just sort of like tease at her and tickle her until she laughed. And then she would start to feel better. And so as a result of this, she would follow Hamed everywhere he went. And he taught her lots of things. And they had a really great relationship. So when Hamed does not return, the sheik and Nadia are just distraught. And they set off to find Hamed. And they talk to a lot of people, and it turns out that people have seen the horse that he was on, but he's nowhere to be found. And it is concluded that he was, as many before him, killed by the sandstorms that they have, the severe sandstorms that they have in the desert areas where they live. And Nadia and the sheik are forced to accept the fact that Hamed is gone and not coming back. Now, they both handle it very differently. So we have some comparing and contrasting here. Tariq keeps to himself. He becomes very withdrawn. He hardly eats. He doesn't want to talk to anyone. Where Nadia kind of becomes like angry, and she stomps and she marches around kind of screaming and barking at people and being very angry, to the point where no one really wants to have anything to do with her. And that makes her feel even more alone. She's without Hamed. Her father's become very withdrawn. And now the other people who might have been able to console her want nothing to do with her because she's so mean. And Tariq, in his grief, makes this pronouncement that no one is ever allowed to say Hamed's name again, because it just brings him too much sadness and pain to hear his son's name. It reminds him of his loss. So Nadia now is dealing with the fact that she's not allowed to mention her brother's name. And this is hard for her, but she's trying. She's trying to do what she's supposed to do. It's just making her even more upset because she's keeping it all inside. She can't share it. Until one day, quite by accident, she discovers something. Her little brothers are playing a game that Hamed taught her to play, but they're playing it wrong. They're not playing it the way he taught her. And so without thinking, she just blurts out, "Hey, you're doing that wrong. That's not the way Hamed taught me." And so the little brothers look around like, oh no, she said his name, but their dad is nowhere to be found, so nothing happens. So they say, "Oh, Nadia, teach us what he taught you." And so as she talks about him, and she teaches her brothers, and she teaches them other games that he taught her, as she talks about Hamed, she realizes something. She's starting to feel better. It makes her pain go away when she talks about him. And she discovered that purely by accident. And so she wants to talk about him more and more and more. So she goes into town and she talks to the different groups of people. And at first they're like, "Oh, no, we don't want to talk about him. We're going to get in trouble." But because the sheik isn't around, nothing happens. And so they start to talk about him too, and it makes them feel better. So she helps everyone with their grief. Plus they all remember him in their hearts and in their minds as they talk about him. And it helps Nadia too, because they tell her stories, memories that they have of her brother. And it makes her grief more manageable. She becomes not so angry and so upset all the time. She finds the shepherds, and since her brother was one of them, he had a favorite little lamb. It was a little black lamb, and he taught it to do tricks, kind of like a dog, I guess, if you will. And so she talks about that little lamb with the shepherds, and they tell stories about that little lamb too. And this helps her until one day a shepherd comes to her tent where her and her dad and mom and brothers live. And without thinking, because he's so used to talking about Hamed, he just shouts out, "Hey Nadia, come see Hamed's little black lamb and how big it's gotten." Only Nadia's not in the tent. It's her dad. And he freaks out because he was told, he told everyone not to say Hamed's name anymore. And in the beginning of the story, the sheik was very kind and gracious and good to his people. But since this happened, his grief has made him kind of bitter and awful. And so he comes roaring out of the tent and he says, "I decreed that no one would ever say his name, and you shall be banished," which means you shall be forced to leave and don't you ever come back. And when Nadia hears this, she pleads with her dad, "No, no, no." But her dad, being a willful and not allowing even one tiny little mistake, says, "No, I have spoken, and that's how it shall be." So the shepherd, he returns to his tent to get his things because he's getting kicked out. And all the other people are like, "Oh man, we are not talking about him anymore. That sheik means what he says." And so as Nadia tries to talk to people again about her brother, they don't want to hear it. They don't want to listen. And she's feeling those old feelings coming back again. She's unable to talk about her brother, and it's starting to hurt again. And she's becoming angrier and angrier. Until one day she can't take it anymore, and she goes to her father, and she confronts him. And she says, "You will not take my brother from me." Now, what does she mean by that? Because her brother's already been taken. He's dead. What she means is, you won't take the memory from me. And the way I remember him is by talking about him. That's what helps me. And I won't let you take that away from me. It's pretty brave for a little girl. And so before the sheik can even say anything, because he's kind of like flabbergasted that she should talk to him like that, before he can even say anything, she says, do you remember what Hamed looks like, Father? Can you remember his voice? And the sheik starts to cry because he can't remember. He's been trying to remember, but he just can't. And so Nadia starts to tell stories about Hamed. And the more she talks about him, the good stories and the bad stories, good memories and bad memories, the more the sheik is able to see him and hear his voice in his mind. And it helps the sheik. So they begin to share stories of Hamed with each other, and it eases their grief, both of them, because they're sharing it. It's not all bottled up inside of them. They can talk about it and laugh and discuss it. And so Nadia then is able to soften her father's heart, and he becomes gentler, and he removes that decree that you can't talk about his son. He wants everyone to talk about his son. He wants his son to be remembered. He says, Nadia gave me back my son. Now, she couldn't give him back. He was dead. But what he meant by that was she helped him be able to remember his son. And so he says, from now on, she will be known not as Nadia the Willful anymore, but as Nadia the Wise. Because she was smart enough to realize that this is what everyone needed, was to talk about Hamed, that it would help. And so the story ends where he is being remembered throughout the clan, and Nadia is being praised in every tent. And the king, or the sheik, is now back to being the kind, gracious man that he was in the beginning. So we see the theme of the story then is that memories can keep the past alive. That talking about and sharing old memories of people and places and things can really help keep those alive in our hearts and in our minds. And it's usually always better to help a person grieve, to talk about things whenever they're ready to. And so we talked about some internal and some external conflict there, where Nadia is conflicted in her mind because she wants to talk about Hamed, but she can't because her father said no. And she's also conflicted because she's angry and she's hurt and she's feeling all these feelings, and she doesn't know how to deal with them because she can't talk about them. And so she becomes angrier and angrier, and the townspeople and even her family want nothing really to do with her because she's so mean. So it's just making everything worse. So I hope this has helped you understand the story just a little bit better. We have a test coming up on it, and I will have it ready for us by Monday. We have Monday and Tuesday, and then we have Easter break or spring break. But please watch this again if you need to. Read your story again if you need to. And tune in on Monday, and I will have your test ready for you. I hope everyone is doing well, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend.